The early morning sun in London had a special quality. It wasn't the hot, blazing sun of summer, but a cool, clear light that made the city's gray stone and green parks look freshly washed. It was the kind of light that promised a crisp, important day. And there was no place in London that felt more important on a morning like this than the wide, open courtyard outside the palace. Tourists were already gathering. A colorful, murmuring crowd pressed against black iron fences. They came from all over, families with fidgety children, couples holding hands, groups of students with backpacks. They all spoke in a dozen different languages, but they were all there for the same quiet show of history and order. The changing of the guard was about to begin. Among the crowd was a young man. He was dressed in expensive, casual clothes, a sleek camera hanging from his neck. He was with two friends, both laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. He had the easy confidence of someone used to being the center of attention in his own small circle. He'd been talking non-stop since they arrived, commenting on everything, turning the solemn occasion into his own personal entertainment. "Look at how still they are," he said to his friends, nodding toward the guards on duty. "Bet they're bored out of their minds. Probably thinking about what's for lunch." His friends chuckled. The guards, in their iconic scarlet tunics and mareskin hats, were indeed still. They stood as motionless as the stone statues around them, their eyes fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Their faces showed nothing, no boredom, no irritation, no amusement. That was the whole point. They were a living part of the palace itself, a symbol of discipline and tradition. One guard, in particular, stood at his post near a tall, wrought iron gate. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a posture so straight it seemed to defy gravity. His skin was a deep, rich brown, a stark and powerful contrast against the bright red of his uniform and the stark black of his hat. He was Guardsman Kofi Mensah, though none of the tourists knew his name. To them, he was just the guard, a piece of the scenery. Guardsman Mensah was not thinking about lunch. His mind was a calm lake, focused on his breathing, on the weight of the rifle by his side, on the feel of the cobblestones beneath his boots. He was aware of the crowd as a distant hum, a sea of blurry movement at the edge of his vision. His job was to be present, and yet separate, to protect and to represent. He took immense pride in this. For him, the uniform was not a costume. It was a testament to years of grueling training, of learning to control every muscle, every blink, every breath. It was an honor worn by generations before him, and he carried that weight with a solemn sense of duty. The young tourist, however, saw only a man standing still. And for him, a still target was a boring one. As the ceremonial music started and the new guard contingent marched in with perfect synchronized steps, the crowd ooh-et and ah'd, but the young man's attention drifted back to the unmoving figure of Guardsman Mensah. "Seriously, how does he not move a muscle?" he said, his voice rising above the music. "It's like he's a robot." He lifted his camera and took a few close-up shots, the shutter clicking loudly. The guard gave no reaction, not a twitch. This annoyed the young man. He was used to getting a reaction. He edged a little closer to the fence, his friends following like an audience. "Maybe he's asleep with his eyes open," he joked. A few people in the crowd nearby glanced over, their expressions uncomfortable. They were here for the tradition, not for a commentary, but the young man mistook their glances for encouragement. He wanted a bigger laugh. He focused on the guard's face, on the proud, stern expression. "Come on, big guy," he muttered, then louder. "Give us a smile. It can't be that bad, standing around all day." A mother with a young child shushed him gently, but he ignored her. The guard remained a statue, his gaze locked forward, seeing everything and yet acknowledging nothing. This incredible discipline, this steel-like control, was what finally sparked something ugly in the young man. He felt small in the face of such silent authority, and he didn't like it. He wanted to crack the surface. He leaned toward his friends, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that was still clearly audible in the immediate vicinity. Probably got the job because they needed a bit of color for the key. Postcards, he snickered. The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The chatter in their little section of the crowd died instantly. An older couple turned away, shaking their heads in clear disgust. The mother pulled her child closer. The young man's own friends stopped laughing, their smiles fading into awkward, frozen masks. One of them mumbled, "Dude, not cool." But the young man, now fully committed to his terrible performance, saw only that he had finally gotten a reaction from the crowd. He didn't see the disgust. He just saw that he was being noticed. He took a step closer to the fence, now only a few yards from where Guardsman Mensa stood. The guard, meanwhile, had heard every word. The insults had sliced through his focused calm like shards of glass. He felt the heat rise in his chest, a primal human urge to turn his head, to fix the loudmouth with a look that would silence him forever. His fingers, tucked neatly against his rifle, wanted to curl into a fist, but he did not move. He thought of the drill sergeants, the endless hours on the parade square. He thought of the other guardsmen, his brothers in arms, depending on him to uphold the standard. He thought of the history. He represented a history that was bigger than one ignorant man. He thought of his own family, who would see his picture in this uniform with such pride. To break now would be to betray all of that. It would make the mockery real. So he poured all that fire, all that hurt, into his stillness. His posture became, if possible, even more rigid. His stare became even more fixed. He transformed the insult into fuel for his duty. He was no longer just standing guard. He was defending the very dignity of his position against an attack. And he would defend it by being flawless. The young man, emboldened by the silence, opened his mouth again. The crowd held its breath. The stage was set. The calm, crisp morning air was now thick with tension, waiting for a single spark to set everything ablaze. And Guardsman Mensa, a figure of monumental patience and simmering strength, stood right at the center of it all, waiting to see what would happen next. The ugly words seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. The little bubble of tourists around the young man had gone completely still. It was like someone had turned off the sound. The cheerful chatter from further away continued, a distant, happy noise that only made the silence right. There feel heavier and more uncomfortable. The young man's friends were now looking at their shoes, at the sky, anywhere but at him or the guard. Their faces were tight with embarrassment. One of them, the one who had mumbled, "Not cool," finally found his voice. "Just leave it, man," he said, his voice low and serious. "This isn't funny anymore." But the young man was in too deep. That little shock of silence from the crowd, the wide-eyed stares, felt like a kind of power. He'd gotten a bigger reaction than he'd expected. He didn't understand it was a reaction of horror, not amusement. He felt a hot, reckless energy buzzing in his chest. He was the star of this show now, he thought, not some stone-faced soldier. He waved his friend off. "Relax," he said, too loudly. "He can't do anything. It's all part of the act." He turned his full attention back to Guardsman Mensa. The guard's absolute stillness, which had been impressive before, now felt like a challenge. It felt like the guard was ignoring him, looking straight through him. That made the young man feel small and stupid, and he hated that feeling. So he decided to push harder. He needed to prove he could break through. He shuffled right up to the metal fence, the barrier that separated the public from the ceremony. He was now as close as any tourist could get. He leaned forward, putting his hands on the cold iron. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharper now. No more joking tone. You hear me? Or do they just hire you guys to stand there and look tough? A woman in a raincoat nearby gasped and actually took a step back, as if the young man's words were something contagious. An older gentleman with a kind face and a camera frowned deeply, his mouth a thin line of disapproval. He looked around, as if searching for a police officer or someone in charge. Guardsman Mensah heard it all. The second comment, the tone, the shift from crude joking to direct confrontation. The heat in his chest wasn't anger anymore. It had cooled into something solid and heavy, like a block of iron settling behind his ribs. His focus, which had been wide and general, now narrowed like a spotlight onto the source of the voice. He didn't move his eyes, but his entire awareness was fixed on the man at the fence. He noted the posture, the aggressive lean, the entitled tone. This was no longer just a noisy tourist. This was a direct disturbance. Every instinct in his body, every bit of his military training, screamed at him to handle the threat. But his training was also what kept him frozen. The rules were absolute. A guard on sentry duty did not speak. He did not engage. He was a symbol of immovable stability. To react was to fail, but there was another rule, a deeper one. His duty was to protect this post. And sometimes, protection meant knowing when a situation was sliding from disrespect into something that could become unsafe. He was trained to assess threats. The man's voice had an edge. He was escalating. The young man, seeing no flicker of response, felt a rush of foolish frustration. He'd called the guard out, and the guard hadn't even blinked. It made him look weak in front of his now mortified friends. He had to win. He glanced left and right. The main ceremony with the marching band and the troop swap was happening farther down the courtyard. Most eyes were on that spectacle. Here at his post, it was just this one guard and this gathering of maybe 20 people who were now watching this ugly sideshow. He made his decision. In a voice loud and clear, laced with a mean kind of triumph, he let the slur fly. It was a single vicious word. It wasn't shouted, but it was said with a cruel clarity that cut through the air like a knife. The effect on the crowd was instant and physical. A young woman put a hand over her mouth. The older gentleman with the camera said, "Oh, for God's sake," his voice filled with disgust. The young man's other friend, who had been silent, finally grabbed his arm. "That's enough. We're leaving," he hissed, his face pale, but the young man shook him off. He was staring at the guard, waiting for the explosion. He was sure this would do it. No one could just stand there and take that for Guardsman Mensah. Time did a strange thing. That word didn't feel like a sound. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to a place behind his eyes. A white-hot flash of pure, undiluted fury surged through his veins, so strong he could taste it, metallic and bitter. His muscles tensed, coiled springs ready to release. For a fraction of a second, the perfect statue almost crumbled. He saw, in his mind's eye, turning. He saw taking the 2 strides to the fence. He saw his hands. It would be so fast. But in that same split second, he saw more. He saw the faces of the other guardsmen, his comrades. He saw the proud, stiff back of the sergeant major who had inspected them at dawn. He saw the flag above the palace. And he saw, clearest of all, the faces of his own family. His mother's face, beaming with pride on his graduation day. What would this moment become if he broke? It would become about his anger, his loss of control. It would justify the taunt. It would reduce a centuries-old tradition of discipline to a scuffle in the street. And in that crystal-clear moment of choice, his training didn't win. His pride did. A deeper, more powerful pride. The pride of knowing he was stronger than the insult. The pride of knowing his role was bigger than this one ignorant person. The fury didn't disappear. He harnessed it. He forged it into willpower. He poured every ounce of that searing energy into absolute, granite stillness. He did not move, but something had changed. The atmosphere around the post had become electric, thick with the tension of what had not happened. The guard's non-reaction was now the most powerful reaction anyone had ever seen. It was awe-inspiring. It was humbling. The young man's smug expression faltered. He'd thrown the worst he had, and the wall hadn't just stood, it hadn't even acknowledged the impact. He felt a cold trickle of doubt. He opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. He had run out of words, Dot. It was then that movement came. But it did not come from Guardsman Mensa. Dot, from the corner of his fixed vision, the guard saw a different kind of precision approaching. 2 military policemen, their red caps stark and authoritative, were marching not with a ceremonial band, but with a direct, purposeful stride. They had been watching. Someone in the crowd had likely signaled them, or they had seen the disturbance themselves. Their faces were stern, professional masks. They were walking straight toward the fence, straight toward the young man. The crowd parted silently to let them through. The show was over. A new kind of authority had arrived. The 2 military policemen moved with a different kind of purpose. They weren't part of the slow, beautiful ceremony of the changing of the guard. Their march was quick, clean, and direct. Their eyes were fixed on the scene by the fence. Everyone could feel that the mood had shifted entirely. This was no longer about a tourist trying to be funny. This was now official. Dot. The young man at the fence saw them coming. All the color drained from his face. That hot, reckless feeling in his chest vanished, replaced by a cold, hard lump of fear. He took a stumbling step back from the fence, bumping into one of his friends. His friends looked just as scared, holding their hands up slightly as if to say, "We had nothing to do with this." But the policemen weren't looking at his friends. They were looking only at him. They stopped a few feet away, their posture stiff and imposing. One of them, an older man with a stern face, spoke. His voice was flat, loud enough to be heard, but without any anger. It was the voice of pure procedure. "Sir," he said, "you are causing a disturbance on a protected ceremonial site. You need to step away from the barrier immediately." The young man's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish out of water. He just pointed a shaky finger toward Guardsman Mensa, who had still not moved a single muscle. He didn't even do anything. The young man finally spluttered, his voice high and whining. "I was just talking." "That's enough, sir," the other policeman said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will come with us now, quietly." This was the moment the crowd had been holding its breath for. They expected the guards to simply grab the young man and haul him off. They expected the silent guard to finally relax, maybe to shake his head or take a deep breath now that it was over. But that is not what happened. Guardsman Mensa moved. It was so sudden, and yet so perfectly controlled that the entire crowd seemed to jump. After being a statue for so long, the sheer fact of his motion was shocking. It wasn't a casual turn. It was a machine-like pivot. His left foot stamped down on the cobblestones with a loud, crisp clack that echoed in the silence. His body followed in one fluid, powerful motion. A perfect right turn, his rifle swinging neatly with him. He was now facing the disturbance head-on. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Phones were raised higher. This was it. The confrontation. The young man flinched, expecting a roar of fury. A finger pointed in his face. Guardsman Mensa took 2 steps forward. Not a rush, not a charge. 2 measured, rhythmic paces that brought him to a spot exactly between his original post and the fence. He stopped with another sharp click of his boots. He was now a figure of immense, focused authority, standing in the open space. He looked directly at the young man. His eyes, which had been blank and distant, were now alive and intense. But there was no hatred in them. There was no personal anger. Instead, they held a terrifying, impersonal fire. He looked through the young man, as if he were just an object that was blocking the proper order of things. Then he spoke. His voice was not a shout. It was deep, clear, and it carried across the courtyard like a bell. Every syllable was razor-sharp, bitten off with perfect diction. It was a voice used to giving commands on a parade ground, a voice that expected to be obeyed. You are obstructing a royal guard on ceremonial duty. The words boomed in the air. They weren't an insult. They weren't a curse. They were a simple, devastating statement of fact. The young man seemed to shrink under the weight of them. Guardsman Mensa continued, his eyes never wavering. This is a protected site. You are breaching the peace of the Queen's Guard. He was not speaking from his own mind. He was reciting, word for word, the official protocol from the manual. He was the voice of the institution itself, of centuries of tradition and law. By using the official words, he stripped the moment of any personal feud. This wasn't about him being offended. This was about the law being broken. He took one more breath, his chest filling the scarlet tunic. He delivered the final line, the command, You will step back immediately. Failure to comply will result in your removal. Then he stopped. He said nothing else. He just stood there, a scarlet and black pillar of absolute authority, waiting for his order to be followed. The effect was stunning. The crowd was completely silent, mesmerized. This was better than any movie. This was real. The guard's response was so much more powerful than anyone could have imagined. He hadn't sunk to the young man's level. He had risen so far above it that the young man looked like a speck on the ground. The young man was shattered. All his bravado, all his arrogant confidence was gone. His shoulders slumped. He couldn't meet the guard's gaze anymore. He looked down at his own expensive shoes, his face burning with a shame so deep it was almost painful to see. The two military policemen didn't need to say another word. The guard had done their job for them. They simply stepped forward, one on each side of the young man. They didn't grab him roughly. They just took a firm hold of his arms. "Right, let's go," the older policeman said, his voice much quieter now. This time, the young man didn't resist. He didn't argue. He let himself be turned around and guided away from the fence, away from the crowd, away from the guard whose unbreakable discipline had just taught him a lesson he would never forget. His friends trailed behind them, heads bowed, wanting to disappear into the stone's dot as they walked away. The crowd remained quiet for a second longer. Then it started. It wasn't wild cheering. It was something more respectful. A solid, warm wave of applause. People were clapping not for a victory, but for a display of incredible dignity. They were clapping for the guard who had shown them what real strength looked like. And through it all, Guardsman Mensa did not acknowledge the applause. He did not smile or nod. His job wasn't finished. He had dealt with the threat. Now he had to return to his duty. With the same stunning precision, he executed a perfect about-turn. Clack. 2 more sharp steps, and he was back exactly on his mark. He resumed his position, his rifle settled by his side, his eyes fixed back on that distant point. He became a statue once more, but to everyone who had witnessed it, he was no longer just a guard. He was the man who had faced ugliness with pure, unshakable principle. And in that quiet courtyard, as the normal sounds of the ceremony and the city slowly returned, the echo of his powerful official voice still seemed to hang in the air. For a long moment after the guardsmen marched the young man away, the atmosphere around the post felt charged, like the air after a lightning strike. The usual tourist murmur was gone. People weren't talking about the palace or the history. They were whispering to each other, their eyes wide, all their attention glued to the single motionless figure back at his post. "He didn't even blink," a woman whispered to her husband, her voice full of awe. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," a teenage boy said to his friend. His phone still held up, reviewing the video he'd just taken. The applause had died down, replaced by a respectful, almost reverent silence. People weren't leaving. They were staying, watching Guardsman Mensah with new eyes. He was no longer part of the scenery. He was the main event. Every person there felt they had witnessed something rare and powerful, not a conflict, but a masterclass in self-control. The young man's two friends had slunk away into the crowd, their faces pale with a mixture of shame and relief. The crowd itself seemed to have collectively decided to give the guard a wide berth. No one pushed too close to the fence. No one shouted silly questions to make him smile. The space around him felt sacred now. Guardsman Mensah was aware of the shift. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. But his focus was internal now. The iron block in his chest was slowly softening. The adrenaline that had fueled his perfect, powerful response was draining away, leaving behind a deep, quiet tiredness. His muscles, held so rigidly for so long, ached with a dull throb. But his mind was clear. He replayed the last few minutes in his head, not with emotion, but with a soldier's analysis. The pivot, the steps, the delivery of the warning. Had it been correct? Had his tone been firm, but within regulation? He ran through the manual's phrases, checking his own memory against them. Satisfied, he allowed himself a single deep breath that only he could feel, a subtle expansion of his ribs beneath the tight tunic. He had held the line, not just the physical line of his post, but the line of his own dignity and the dignity of his uniform. Meanwhile, the world was already moving on. The grand ceremony of the changing of the guard was concluding down the way. The band played a final, rousing march. The new guard contingent was in place, looking just as fresh and immovable as he had hours ago. The officer in charge barked a command, and in a synchronized wave, the relieved guardsmen, the ones who had been on duty before, Guardsman Mensah marched off in perfect formation, thought it was almost time for his own relief. But for now, he remained. The sun climbed a little higher, warming the wool of his tunic. A pigeon landed nearby and cooed. Oblivious to the human drama that had just unfolded in the crowd, people were already sharing what they'd seen. A middle-aged man with a kind face was quietly explaining to his young daughter what had happened. "That man was very rude," he said softly. But the soldier didn't get angry. He just did his job perfectly. That's what real strength is. The little girl nodded, her eyes serious, looking at the guard as if he were a superhero. Smartphones were buzzing. Thumb-typed messages flew out from the courtyard. "You won't believe what just happened at the palace." The short, shaky videos were already being uploaded, clipped, and shared. The story was escaping the stone walls, moving into the digital world. Finally, the moment came. Guardsman Mensah heard the familiar, crisp footsteps of his relief approaching from behind. He didn't turn. He waited. Another guardsman, identical in uniform, marched up beside him. They stood shoulder to shoulder for a precise 10-second interval. No words were spoken. None were needed. In a beautifully choreographed swap, the new guard took 2 steps forward onto the mark. Guardsman Mensah took 2 steps back, then executed a sharp turn. His duty was over as he marched away with the same mechanical precision. The crowd watched him go. A few people clapped again, softly. He didn't acknowledge it. His face was still a mask of concentration. He marched around a corner, out of the public eye, and only then, and the relative privacy of a stone archway leading to the barracks, did the transformation begin. The rigid posture eased, just a fraction. The locked stare gaze dropped to the ground in front of his boots. He took a real deep breath, feeling it shake slightly as he let it out. He was human again. He entered a plain, tidy room where the other off-duty guards were storing their bearskins and rifles. The atmosphere here was different, alive, with the quiet chatter of men coming off a long, demanding shift. The moment he walked in, the chatter stopped. All eyes turned to him. A fellow guardsman, a man with a friendly face who had been on the other side of the courtyard, gave a low whistle. "Heard you had some excitement at your post, brother." Another one clapped him gently on the shoulder. "Everyone's talking about it." Saw the redcaps march a right idiot away. Guardsman Mensah finally allowed himself a small, tight smile. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of shared understanding, of relief at being back with his own. "Just another day on the job," he said, his voice rough from hours of silence. But the look in their eyes told him they knew it was more than that. They understood the pressure, the insult, the monumental effort of that stillness. Their respect was unspoken, but it filled the room. He began the careful process of removing his uniform. The bearskin hat, heavy and majestic, was placed on its stand. The scarlet tunic, lined with sweat from the morning sun and the heat of the confrontation, was unbuttoned. Each piece was treated with a ritual care. This wasn't just getting undressed. It was the slow, steady process of transitioning from a symbol back into a mandot as he hung the tunic up. His sergeant, a weathered man with sharp eyes, entered the room. He walked straight over. He didn't give a speech. He just looked at Guardsman Mensah and gave a single, firm nod. "Textbook, lad," the sergeant said, his voice gravelly. "Exactly as it should be done. You made the regiment proud today. That was the highest praise possible. It meant more than any crowd's applause." Guardsman Mensah nodded back. "Thank you, Sergeant." The sergeant's mouth twitched. "Rest up. Tomorrow's another day." And with that, he moved on. Left alone for a moment, Guardsman Mensah sat on a plain wooden bench. He closed his eyes. The image of the young man's face, twisted with meanness, flashed in his mind. Then he replaced it with the image of the two military policemen marching him away. He focused on the feeling of his comrades around him now, the solid feeling of having done his duty well. He thought of his family, thousands of miles away. He was glad they hadn't been there to see the ugliness. But he was also, in a deep part of his heart, proud of how he had handled it. He knew they would be proud too, not because he was a hero, but because he had remembered who he was supposed to be. Outside, the palace courtyard was once again just a tourist spot. The new guard stood, impassive and still. Life moved on. But a story was now traveling through the city, growing with each retelling. And at the heart of it was not the foolish young man, but the quiet, unbreakable discipline of the guard in the bearskin hat, who had shown a crowd of strangers what dignity truly looked like. The story didn't end in the quiet barracks room. It had wings, and it flew. By the time the guardsman had finished his simple lunch in the mess hall, the videos were already starting to spread. They weren't on the big news sites yet, but they were hopping from phone to phone, from friend to friend. People who had been there sent them to people who hadn't, always with a message like, "Look at this. You have to see this." The clips were short and shaky. You could hear the crowd's gasp, the awful words mumbled but clear enough, and then that stunning, powerful response. You saw the perfect turn, the 2 steps forward, and you heard that voice, a voice that wasn't shouting, but seemed to shake the very air. Most of all, you felt the tension, the incredible weight of that moment. By the evening, it had reached the local news. A daytime TV show played the clip. The hosts weren't sensational about it. Their faces were serious. "This," one of them said, is a lesson in dignity. Watch how this guard deals with a situation that would make most of us lose our cool. The next day, a newspaper ran a story on an inside page. The headline was simple: "Dignity Under Fire." The article didn't focus on the ugliness of the taunts. It focused on the response. It called it a masterful display of discipline and protocol, and spoke about the intense training these guards undergo to remain impassive. The guard was not named. He was simply a guardsman of the household division. This was right. The story was about the uniform, the tradition, and the man inside it who had honored both so completely. A few days later, a different kind of message appeared online. It was a post on a social media page often used for public apologies and statements. The account was new, barely used. The post was short and had clearly been written and rewritten many times. Asterisk, "To the guard on duty at the palace on Saturday morning." Asterisk, it began. Asterisk, "I am the person who was disrespectful to you. There is no excuse for what I said. My words were ignorant and cruel. I am deeply ashamed." Seeing your professionalism and hearing your response was a shock. It made me realize how small my behavior was. I have let down my friends and my family. I am sorry for the disturbance I caused and for the offense I gave. It will not happen again. Asterisk, it was signed simply, "A deeply remorseful individual." People debated whether it was real. Some thought it was a good sign. Others thought it was too little, too late. But for those who believed it, it added a final chapter. The guard's response hadn't just controlled a situation. It had, perhaps, sparked a change in a person's heart. That made the story even more powerful. Meanwhile, life at the barracks returned to its normal rhythm. Early mornings, endless polishing of boots until you could see your face in them. Parade practice where every step had to be in perfect unison. The guardsman who had been at the center of it all was just another soldier again. His comrades might rib him gently, calling him the voice, or asking him to recite the weather report in his command tone, but it was all in good fun. The respect was real, but so was the normality. One afternoon, a week after the incident, he was called to see a senior officer. He stood at attention in the office, wondering if this was about something else entirely. "At ease, guardsman," the officer said, "a man with kind eyes, but a no-nonsense manner. I suppose you know why you're here." "The incident at the post, sir?" "Precisely. We've reviewed all the footage and the reports from the military police. Your actions were, in every single particular, correct. You maintained your composure under severe provocation. You invoked the correct protocol at the correct time. You upheld the highest standards of the guard. Thank you, sir." The officer leaned forward slightly. "The media has been asking for an interview. They want to know who you are. They want to put a name to the face." A guardsman felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't want that. He didn't want to be a celebrity. He was a soldier, not a talk show guest. The officer seemed to read his mind. "We have declined firmly. Your duty was to represent the crown anonymously. That remains the case, however." He paused. "If you were willing, our public affairs team would like a brief, off-the-record conversation. Not for a news story, but to help them understand the moment from your perspective. It would be entirely private." The guardsman thought about it. He nodded. "I can do that, sir." Later, in a plain room with two civil servants who worked in uniform, he sat down. They weren't recording. They just had notebooks. "Can you tell us," one asked gently, "what was going through your mind when the verbal abuse began?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My job is to be a guard. My mind is supposed to be on my duty. When it started, I tried to keep it there, on my breathing, on my position. And when it escalated, when he used that word, The guardsman looked down at his hands, which were resting on his knees. They were strong hands, used to hard work. "That was difficult," he said, his voice quiet. "For a second, I wasn't a guard. I was just a man being insulted. I felt it. Here." He touched his chest. I wanted to turn and look at him. Just look at him. Why didn't you? He looked up. Because then I would have been just a man reacting to an insult. And that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to be a guard. The uniform isn't mine. It's for the Queen, for the country, the history. If I had reacted for myself, I would have brought all that down. I would have made it small. So I put it away. I used the feeling. I turned it into the thing that kept me still. One of the civil servants was writing quickly. The other just nodded, her eyes understanding. "And the response? The words you used?" "That was easy," he said, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "That's in the manual. That's the drill. When he became a disturbance to the post, not just to me, my job was to state the rule. So I did. I became the manual. It wasn't me speaking. It was the job." They asked a few more questions, and he answered plainly. When they were done, they both thanked him. "You've given us a lot to think about," one said. "More than you know." He returned to his duties. The fuss slowly died down. The news moved on to other stories. The video still popped up now and then online, collecting comments from people newly amazed by it. For the guardsman, the truest end of the story came on his next day off. He changed into casual clothes jeans and a simple jacket. He looked like any other young man in the city. He went to a small, quiet park and sat on a bench. He called his family on a video call. His mother's face filled the screen. She was smiling, but her eyes were searching his. They had seen the video. Someone from their village had sent it to them. "Mom," he said. "My son," she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. "We saw. Everyone has seen. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom, really. It was just a job." She shook her head slowly. "No, it was not just a job. I saw your face. I know my son. That was hard." He couldn't lie to her. He nodded, looking away from the screen for a second. "Yeah, for a minute, it was hard. But you remembered who you were," she said, her voice firm now, full of a mother's fierce pride. "You remembered you are a good man and a good soldier. You did not let him change that." Hearing her say it, in her simple, direct way, lifted a weight he hadn't even known he was still carrying. It wasn't the sergeant's praise or the newspaper article that mattered most. It was this. His mom understood. They talked about normal things after that, about his sister, about the weather back home. It was ordinary and perfect. He hung up and sat on the bench, watching people walk their dogs and children play. He was nobody special to them. Just a guy on a bench. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The incident was a part of his story now, but it didn't define him. He was a guardsman. He had a duty. And tomorrow, he would put on the scarlet tunic and the bearskin hat once more, and stand perfectly still, guarding something much bigger than himself. The world might have seen a stunning response, but for him, it was, and always would be, just another day at work.